The room went silent. Not the kind of silence you get when someone asks for quiet. No, this was the heavy kind. The kind that drops like a stone into water when something shocking is about to happen. I stood there in my white wedding dress, microphone in hand, looking out at 200 faces staring back at me. Some wore expensive suits. Others dripped with jewelry that cost more than most people make in a year. They were the cream of society, as they liked to call themselves. The elite. The untouchable. And they had spent the last hour laughing at me. Imagine, Adrian's cousin had said loud enough for everyone to hear, a billionaire marrying a laundress's daughter. It's practically charity work. The laughter that followed cut through me like broken glass. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled, the way I'd learned to smile through every insult, every whispered judgment, every cruel joke they'd thrown my way since the day I met this family. My new mother-in-law, Victoria Lockhart, had raised her champagne glass with a smirk. She'll have to learn quickly, she'd announced to the table nearest her. Lockhart women don't wash clothes. They buy them. More laughter. More knowing glances. More champagne sipped while they celebrated their own cleverness. But now, as I stood at the microphone with the folder in my hand, that laughter had died. First, I began, my voice steady and clear. I want to thank the Lockhart family for welcoming me today. Would you stay silent if your husband's family humiliated you in front of everyone you knew? Or would you fight back? Victoria's smile widened. She thought I was about to grovel. To thank them for tolerating poor little me. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I know it hasn't been easy, I continued, watching their faces, for you to accept someone from my background. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Adrian sat frozen beside his mother, his face unreadable. The man I'd married just 2 hours ago. The man who had never once defended me against his family's cruelty. I opened the folder slowly, letting the moment stretch. But I need to clarify something, I said, pulling out the papers inside. You see, while I am the daughter of a laundress, I'm also something else. The room leaned forward. Even the waiters stopped moving. I placed the documents on the table in front of Victoria. Her eyes scanned the first page, and I watched the color drain from her face like water down a sink. I am the founder and CEO of L'Oreal Naturals, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of that grand ballroom. A company that was valued last quarter at $50 million. Someone gasped. Then another. Then the whole room erupted into whispers, like a match had been struck in a room full of dry paper. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her perfectly painted lips just hung there, frozen in shock. I looked out at the crowd, at all those people who'd spent months looking down on me, and I smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a cruel one. Just calm. Peaceful. So you see, I said, I may come from humble beginnings. But I stand here today not as your charity case. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across every face in that room. I stand here as a woman who built her own empire. The applause started small. 1 person. Then 3. Then suddenly half the room was clapping, and the journalists I'd carefully invited as my guests were scribbling in their notebooks like their lives depended it. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Victoria's face crumble. Watching her realize that she'd spent months mocking a woman who could have bought her precious estate twice over. Adrian reached for my hand under the table. And I let it slip away. Because in that moment, something inside me had broken. Not from their insults. Not from their laughter. But from his silence. From every time he'd sat there and let them tear me down without saying a single word. And now, I said into the microphone, my voice still steady, still calm, I think it's time we cut the cake. I am an old man now. My hands shake when I hold my coffee cup. My back aches when the weather turns cold. The mirror shows me a face mapped with wrinkles, each line a story, each gray hair a lesson learned the hard way. But age, my dear friends, is not a curse. It's a lantern. And that lantern doesn't burn bright and harsh like the fire of youth. No, it glows soft and steady, revealing truths that young eyes cannot see. It shows you what hides beneath people's smiles. It teaches you to hear the lies wrapped inside pretty words. I've lived long enough to watch empires crumble. I've seen proud men brought low by their own arrogance. I've watched humble people rise like phoenixes from ash, their wings made of patience and quiet determination. And I've learned something that took me 70 years to understand. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives in a single moment when a truth, hidden for years, finally steps into the light. This story I'm telling you, it's one of those moments. You just witnessed Marielle stand up at her own wedding and shatter the Lockhart family's pride like a hammer through glass. You saw Victoria's face drain of color. You heard that room fall silent, then erupt, then fall silent again. But that moment didn't happen by accident. That moment was built, brick by brick, insult by insult, over months of suffering. To understand why Marielle's revelation hit so hard, you need to know where she came from. You need to walk the path she walked, feel the hunger she felt, and see the world through the eyes of a little girl who had nothing. Because before Marielle Duarte stood in a wedding dress worth more than a car, she stood in hand-me-down shoes with holes in the soles. Before she commanded a room full of billionaires, she sat in a cramped apartment listening to her mother cry. And before she built an empire, she learned the most important lesson of all. People will judge you by your clothes, your address, and your last name. But they can never see what you're building in the dark. So let me take you back. Back to where this all began. Back to the girl who would one day make the Lockharts wish they'd kept their mouths shut. For before she stood in silk, she once stood in rags. Marielle was 8 years old when her father died. I remember nights like that. Nights when the world doesn't just change, it shatters. One day you're a child with 2 parents and a warm bed. The next, you're standing at a funeral watching your mother's face turn to stone because she can't afford to break down. Not yet. Not when there are bills to pay and a daughter to feed. Marielle's father had been a good man. The kind who worked 2 jobs and still came home smiling. The kind who saved every penny he could for his daughter's future. But good men die too. Heart attack at 42, probably from all that work and worry. What he left behind wasn't a fortune or a college fund. It was debt. Mountains of it. Hospital bills. Funeral costs. Rent they'd been behind on for 3 months. The neighbors whispered. Oh, how they whispered. That family's finished, they said. They'll never climb out of that hole. The mother will probably have to send the girl away. To relatives, maybe. Or worse. Marielle heard every word. Children always do, even when adults think they're being quiet. Her mother, Maria, didn't send her away. Instead, she did what strong women have done since the beginning of time. She worked. She took over a dying laundry shop in their neighborhood, working 16-hour days washing other people's clothes. Her hands cracked and bled from the detergent. Her back bent from years of standing over washing machines. But she never complained. Not once. Young Marielle would come home from school to find her mother still at the shop, folding someone's expensive sheets, someone's silk blouses, someone's designer suits. The same people who wouldn't give Maria the time of day if they passed her on the street. Mama, Marielle asked one night when she was 10, why do they treat you like you're invisible? Maria looked up from her work, her tired eyes meeting her daughter's. Because, my love, they measure worth by money. They see my rough hands and think that's all I am. But that's not fair. No, her mother agreed, folding another shirt with careful precision. It's not. But here's what I want you to remember. She leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper like she was sharing the world's most important secret. They can look down on you all they want. Let them. While they're busy judging, you'll be busy building. And one day, you'll stand taller than all of them combined. Those words planted a seed in Marielle's heart. She watched her mother work with dignity, even when customers spoke to her like she was nothing. She watched her save every extra dollar in a mason jar hidden in the kitchen cabinet. She watched her smile through exhaustion, through pain, through the cruel whispers of people who thought poverty was catching. And Marielle made herself a promise. One day, she would build something. Something real. Something that couldn't be taken away by bad luck or bad health or bad people. She just didn't know what. Not yet. School was hard. Not the learning part. Marielle was sharp as a tack, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. But the social part. The part where other kids showed up in new sneakers while she wore shoes held together with duct tape. The part where they talked about their family vacations while she'd never left the state. The part where they smelled like expensive perfume while she smelled like laundry detergent. "Your mom washes underwear for a living," a girl named Chelsea said one day in 7th grade, her voice dripping with disgust. "That's so gross." The other kids laughed. Marielle didn't. She just looked at Chelsea with calm eyes and said, "At least she works for what we have." "What does your mom do besides spend your dad's money?" The laughter stopped. Chelsea's face turned red. The teacher sent Marielle to the principal's office for being disrespectful. But Marielle had learned something important that day. Words were weapons, and she knew how to use them. By 16, she was working at the laundry shop after school. By 18, she was taking online courses at night, teaching herself things her public school never covered. Business, marketing, technology. Things that cost nothing but time and determination. Her classmates went to parties. Marielle stayed up until 2 in the morning watching YouTube tutorials on how to build websites. Her friends posted selfies from the mall. Marielle was learning about supply chains and profit margins. They thought she was boring. She thought they were wasting their lives. "Don't you want to have fun?" her friend Rosa asked once. "I am having fun," Marielle replied, her eyes never leaving her laptop screen. "I'm building my future." And in those nights of hunger, exhaustion, and endless work, she dreamed of building something greater. The first time Marielle saw Adrian Lockhart, she didn't know he was rich. That's the funny thing about fate. Sometimes it sneaks up on you wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Marielle had just turned 26. She was sitting in a small bookstore cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and the smell of old paper mixing with fresh coffee. She came there every week because the owner let her sit for hours with just 1 cup of coffee, and the Wi-Fi was free. She was working on her laptop, lost in spreadsheets and product descriptions, when someone bumped her table. Her coffee cup wobbled. A hand shot out and caught it before it spilled. "I'm so sorry," a voice said. "I wasn't looking where I was going." She looked up and saw a man about her age. Dark hair slightly messy. Nice smile. Eyes that actually looked at her, not through her like she was part of the furniture. "It's okay," she said. "No harm done." He glanced at her laptop screen. "Is that an e-commerce platform you're building?" Most people would have just walked away. But he seemed genuinely interested. "Trying to," she admitted. "It's harder than it looks." "Mind if I sit?" "I actually know a bit about that stuff." "Have you ever met someone who changed your life in 5 minutes? Drop a comment if you have. That's how it started. Not with fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. Just 2 people in a bookstore cafe, talking about business and dreams and the weird way the world works. Adrian didn't tell her who he was. Not that day. He just helped her fix a coding error that had been driving her crazy for a week. They talked for 3 hours. When he finally had to leave, he asked for her number. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "If that's okay." Something in her stomach fluttered. Something she hadn't felt in years. Something dangerous called hope. They started meeting every week. Same bookstore. Same table if they could get it. He'd bring pastries. She'd bring questions about her growing business. He never dressed fancy. Never flashed money. Never acted like he was better than anyone. He was kind. Patient. Funny in a quiet way that made her laugh without trying. "What do you do for work?" she asked him one day, about a month in. He hesitated. Just for a second, but she caught it. "I work in finance. Family business." "It's boring, honestly." "Everything's boring if you talk about it like that," she teased. He smiled. "You're right. But I'd rather talk about your business. Tell me about this eco-friendly beauty line you're building." So she did. She told him about L'Oreal Naturals. About how she'd started making natural skincare products in her mother's kitchen. About how she'd saved for 2 years to buy proper equipment. About how she was slowly, carefully, building something that felt real. "You're going to be successful," he said, and the way he said it, she actually believed him. 3 months later, he kissed her in the rain outside that bookstore. 6 months later, he finally told her the truth. "I need to tell you something," he said one evening. They were walking through a park, leaves crunching under their feet. About my family. Okay, she said slowly. They're wealthy. Very wealthy. And they can be. He searched for the word, difficult. How wealthy are we talking? Lockhart wealthy. Her steps faltered. Everyone in the city knew that name. The Lockhart Empire. Real estate. Hotels. Banks. Old money mixed with new investments. You're one of those Lockharts? She asked. Yeah. He looked worried, like he expected her to run. Does that change things? She thought about it. Really thought about it. Then she shook her head. You've never treated me like you were better than me. That's what matters. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I knew there was a reason I fell for you. But what Adrian didn't understand yet, what he couldn't see in his privileged bubble of kindness, was that money doesn't just change how you live. It changes how people see you. How they judge you. How they treat those who don't have it. And his family was about to teach Marielle that lesson the hard way. Come to dinner at my parents' house this weekend, he said, his eyes bright with hope. I want them to meet you. She smiled and agreed, because she loved him. Because she thought love was enough. But love, my dear, is never simple when money sits at the table. The Lockhart estate sat behind iron gates, like a castle protecting itself from peasants. Marielle's hands were sweaty as Adrian drove his car up the long driveway. Trees lined both sides, perfectly trimmed, probably by a team of gardeners who made more in a month than her mother made in a year. The house appeared around a curve. Except it wasn't a house. It was a mansion. 3 stories of stone and glass, with columns that belonged in a museum and windows that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. It's a bit much, I know, Adrian said, catching her expression. I grew up here, so I forget how it looks to other people. It's beautiful, she said, which was true. It was also terrifying. She'd dressed carefully for this dinner. Her best dress, which she'd bought at a thrift store and altered herself. Simple jewelry she'd saved for. Hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked respectable, professional, presentable. But the moment she stepped through those massive front doors, she knew it wasn't enough. A woman glided down the grand staircase like she was floating. Victoria Lockhart, Adrian's mother. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Marielle's car. Her jewelry caught the light from the chandelier overhead, sending rainbow sparkles across the marble floor. Mother, this is Marielle, Adrian said, his voice warm. Marielle, my mother. Victoria's smile was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. How lovely to meet you, she said, extending a hand with fingers that had never washed a dish or scrubbed a floor. Adrian has told us so much about you. The way she said so much made it sound like Adrian had been talking about a stray dog he'd found. Dinner was served in a dining room bigger than Marielle's entire apartment. The table could seat 20 people. Tonight it seated 6. Adrian, his parents, his younger sister Elena, and some family friend named Gregory, who kept staring at Marielle like she was a science experiment. The food was fancy. The kind where you're not sure which fork to use and everything has a French name. Marielle watched the others and copied them. She'd learned early in life that observation was a survival skill. So, Marielle, Victoria said, cutting her meat with surgical precision. Adrian mentioned you grew up in the city. What neighborhood? Here it comes, Marielle thought. The South Side, she said. Near the industrial district. Oh. Victoria's eyebrows lifted. That's quite urban. It's home, Marielle replied evenly. And your parents? What do they do? The table went quiet. Even the sound of silverware stopped. Marielle met Victoria's eyes. She knew what this was. A test. A trap. But she'd never been ashamed of her mother, and she wasn't about to start now. My father passed away when I was young. My mother runs a laundry shop. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Victoria's smile thinned. How quaint. And just like that, the judgment was cast. The insults didn't stop after that first dinner. They multiplied like weeds in a garden nobody tends. 2 weeks later, Victoria invited Marielle to a charity luncheon. It'll be good for you to meet the other women in our circle, she'd said on the phone, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Marielle should have known better. But she was trying. God, she was trying so hard to fit into Adrian's world. She showed up in her best outfit, a simple navy dress she'd found at a consignment shop. It was clean, professional, appropriate. Every other woman there wore designer labels. Chanel, Dior, Prada. Their handbags cost more than Marielle's monthly rent. Victoria introduced her to the group with a smile that could cut steel. Ladies, this is Marielle. She's dating my son. Isn't that unexpected? The women looked her up and down like she was livestock at an auction. That's a lovely dress, one of them said. Is it vintage? It's secondhand, Marielle answered honestly, because she'd never learned to lie well. The woman's smile froze. How economical of you. They spent the next hour talking about their vacation homes, their private jets, their children's expensive schools. Every story felt like a brick added to a wall between Marielle and them. Where did you go to college, dear? Someone asked. I didn't, Marielle said. I took online courses while working. The silence was deafening. Well, Victoria said, patting Marielle's hand like she was a child, not everyone is cut out for traditional education. But the worst came at a gala 3 months into her relationship with Adrian. The Lockharts had a whole table. Family friends. Business partners. People who measured their worth in billions, not millions. Marielle wore a dress Adrian had insisted on buying her. She'd fought him on it, but he'd won. Please, he'd said. Just this once. I want you to feel comfortable. But comfort wasn't something you could buy with expensive fabric. She was standing by the bar, getting a drink, when she heard Victoria's voice behind her. I just don't understand what he sees in her, Victoria was saying to a woman Marielle didn't recognize. She's pretty enough, I suppose. But she has no breeding. No class. No connections. Maybe it's a phase, the other woman said. Rich boys love playing save the poor girl. They always come back to their own kind eventually. Let's hope so. Can you imagine her at family functions? She doesn't know which fork to use half the time. They laughed. That awful, tinkling laugh that rich women perfect over champagne and cruelty. Marielle's hand shook as she picked up her drink. But she didn't turn around. Didn't confront them. She just walked back to the table, her head high, her face calm. Adrian was on his phone. He didn't notice the tears she was blinking back. The pattern repeated itself over and over. Snide comments about her clothes. Jokes about her background. Once, at a dinner party, Adrian's uncle asked her if she'd ever been on a plane before. When she said no, he laughed so hard he choked on his wine. Adrian, she said one night after another brutal family event, your mother hates me. She doesn't hate you, he protested. She just needs time to adjust. She called me your charity case. At the Hendersons' party. I heard her. His face went pale. She said that. You were standing 10 feet away. I didn't hear. You never hear it, Adrian. That's the problem. He pulled her close. I'll talk to her. I promise. But he never did. Or if he did, it didn't change anything. And Marielle, watching all of this unfold, storing every insult like stones in her pocket, began to understand something important. These people would never accept her. Not because of who she was, but because of where she came from. So she stopped trying to fit in. Instead, she started watching. Learning. Taking notes on every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every time Adrian stayed silent when he should have spoken. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that she was building something far more powerful than their taunts. Let me take you back further. Back to when Marielle was 21 and desperate. Her mother's laundry shop was failing. Not slowly, like a sunset. Quickly, like a drowning. A corporate dry cleaning chain had opened 2 blocks away. They had machines Maria couldn't afford. Prices Maria couldn't match. Advertising Maria couldn't compete with. Customers disappeared like water through a sieve. We'll be okay, Maria said, but her eyes told a different story. At night, Marielle heard her mother crying in the bathroom with the water running, trying to hide the sound. They were 3 months behind on rent. The landlord had started leaving threatening notes under the door. Marielle looked at her mother's cracked hands, her bent back, her tired eyes, and something inside her snapped. Not broke. Snapped into focus. "I'm going to fix this," she told her mother. "How?" Maria asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "I don't know yet, but I will." That night, Marielle sat at her laptop until 4 in the morning. She'd been watching videos about e-commerce for months, learning about online businesses, studying how people built empires from their bedrooms. She had exactly $300 in savings. $300 between her family and homelessness. Most people would have spent it on rent, on food, on survival. Marielle spent it on inventory. She bought raw materials, shea butter, essential oils, natural preservatives. She'd been experimenting with skincare recipes for years, making products for herself because she couldn't afford store-bought brands. Her skin was clear. Her mother's friends always asked what she used. What if I could sell this, she'd thought back then. Now, with her back against the wall and her mother's tears echoing in her ears, what if became I will. She worked like someone possessed. After her shifts at a local diner, because the laundry shop couldn't pay her anymore, she'd come home and mix products. She bought cheap containers online, designed labels using free software, taught herself photography by watching YouTube videos. Her first product was a face cream. Natural ingredients. No chemicals. Good for sensitive skin. She named her company Oriel Naturals. Oriel, a combination of Aura and her mother's name, Maria. It felt right. She built a website using a free trial of an e-commerce platform. It looked amateur, but it worked. She took photos of her products on her phone, using her mother's white sheets as a backdrop. Her first sale came on a Tuesday. $15 for 1 jar of face cream. She stared at her laptop screen for 10 minutes, not believing it was real. Then she packaged it carefully, walked to the post office, and shipped it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The customer left a 5-star review. "This cream is amazing. My skin has never felt better. Where have you been all my life?" That review led to another sale. Then another. Then 5 in one day. Marielle slept 3 hours a night. She mixed products in her mother's kitchen until her hands smelled permanently of lavender and tea tree oil. She answered customer messages at 2 in the morning. She packed orders before her diner shifts and after them. "You're going to kill yourself working like this," her mother warned. "I'm going to save us," Marielle replied. By the end of the first year, Oriel Naturals was making $5,000 a month. Not enough to call herself successful, but enough to pay the back rent. Enough to buy her mother a new washing machine for the shop. Enough to breathe. By year 2, she'd hired a manufacturer. A small one, but legitimate. Her products were in bottles with real labels, not handwritten stickers. She'd learned about Facebook ads, Instagram marketing, and influencer partnerships. She reinvested every penny. While other 23-year-olds were buying new clothes and going to bars, Marielle was buying inventory. Upgrading her website. Testing new products. "Don't you want to enjoy your money?" her friend Rosa asked. "This is how I enjoy it," Marielle said, watching her sales dashboard climb. "Every dollar I make is proof that I'm more than what people think I am." By year 3, Oriel Naturals hit $1 million in annual revenue. By year 4, $5 million. By year 5, the year she met Adrian, she was on track for $20 million. But here's the thing about wealth that most people don't understand. It's not just about the money. It's about the choices it gives you. The freedom it provides. The power to say no to people who think they own you. Marielle never told anyone about her success. She lived in the same small apartment, drove the same old car, wore the same thrift store clothes. Why? Because she was testing the world. Testing to see who would value her when they thought she had nothing. Testing to see if Adrian loved her or loved the idea of saving her. And by the time Adrian slipped a diamond on her finger, she was already worth millions. The engagement ring sparkled on Marielle's finger like a question mark made of diamonds. Adrian had proposed at a fancy restaurant. Down on one knee. The whole room watching. "Marry me," he'd said, his eyes full of hope and love and everything she'd ever wanted. She'd said yes because she loved him. Because in quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, he was everything she'd dreamed of. Kind. Funny. Smart. Real. But the question that kept her awake at night wasn't about love. It was about something deeper. Something that gnawed at her stomach like hunger. Would he love her if she had nothing? She'd never told him about L'Oreal Naturals. Not directly. He knew she had a small online business. He'd helped her with that coding problem the day they met. But he had no idea about the revenue. The growth. The fact that she was on track to be worth $50 million before their first anniversary. She told herself it was because she wanted privacy. Because mixing business and romance was complicated. Because she wasn't ready to share that part of herself. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She was afraid. Afraid that if he knew she had money, everything would change. Afraid that his family would suddenly accept her, not because she was worthy, but because she was wealthy. Afraid that she'd never know if people loved her or loved what she could give them. "I want to plan the wedding at the estate," Victoria announced one Sunday dinner. Not asked. Announced. "It'll be the social event of the season." "Mother, shouldn't Marielle have a say?" Adrian started. "Of course she will, darling. But she doesn't know how these things work." "Not really. It's better if I handle it." Marielle watched this happen. Watched Adrian's weak protest die in his throat. Watched him nod and smile and say, "Whatever you think is best, Mother." That night, in Adrian's apartment, she asked the question that had been building for months. "Why don't you ever stand up to them?" He looked confused. "Stand up to who?" "Your family. Your mother. When they insult me. When they treat me like I'm less than them." "They don't." "Yes, they do." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And you let them." Adrian ran his hands through his hair. "It's complicated. They're my family. They're set in their ways. But they'll come around. Once we're married, once you're officially part of the family, I'll still be the laundress's daughter who trapped their son." "That's not true. Isn't it?" Silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. "I love you," Adrian said finally. "That's what matters. Right?" She wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that love was enough. But she'd watched her mother love a man who died and left them with nothing but debt. She'd watched friends love men who promised forever and delivered heartbreak. Love without respect was just pretty words that turned to ash. "Right," she said, because she didn't have the energy to fight. "Not yet. If your partner's family disrespected you, would you stay or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments." The wedding planning became Victoria's personal kingdom. She chose the flowers, the menu, the seating chart, the music. Every time Marielle suggested something, Victoria would smile and say, "That's lovely, dear, but let's go with something more appropriate." Appropriate meant expensive. Meant showy. Meant everything designed to prove the Lockharts were superior to everyone in attendance. "I want my mother to give a speech," Marielle said during one planning meeting. Victoria's smile tightened. "We usually keep the speeches to the immediate family." "My mother is immediate family." "Of course, dear. I meant the Lockhart family." "You understand." No, Marielle didn't understand. But she nodded anyway because she was tired of fighting battles she couldn't win. Until she realized something that changed everything. She could win. She'd just been fighting the wrong way. These people measured worth in dollars. So she would speak their language. Not before the wedding, that would look like she was trying to prove something. But at the wedding. At the moment when they felt most powerful, most untouchable, most certain of their superiority. That's when she would show them who she really was. Not to gain their approval. She didn't want that anymore. She wanted them to feel what she'd felt every time they mocked her. Every time they whispered. Every time they treated her like she was lucky to breathe their air. She wanted them to know they'd been wrong. So very, catastrophically wrong. And she began to wonder if the man she married could stand beside her when she had nothing. Could he handle standing beside her when she had everything? The wedding day arrived like a storm dressed in silk. Marielle woke up at dawn in one of the Lockhart estate's guest rooms. Through the window, she could see workers setting up the ceremony on the back lawn. White chairs in perfect rows. A flower arch that probably cost more than her mother's yearly salary. Tables dressed in cream and gold, waiting for the 200 guests who would judge every detail. This wasn't a wedding. It was a performance. and Marielle was expected to play the role of grateful bride who'd won the lottery by marrying up. Her mother arrived early, carrying Marielle's grandmother's necklace, the only piece of jewelry that had survived their poorest years because Maria had refused to pawn it, no matter how hungry they got. For luck, Maria said, fastening it around Marielle's neck. Her fingers trembled slightly. Mama, Marielle said softly, are you okay? Maria's eyes filled with tears. I want you to be happy. Really happy. Not the kind of happy that looks good on the outside, but feels empty inside. I know. Do you? Maria cupped her daughter's face. Because I've watched you these past months. I've seen you smile when you want to cry. I've seen you bite your tongue when you should speak. I've seen you become smaller and smaller, trying to fit into their world. After today, I won't have to be small anymore, Marielle said. Her mother didn't understand. Nobody did. But they would. Soon. The ceremony was beautiful in the way expensive things always are. Perfect but cold, like a diamond that catches the light but gives no warmth. Adrian stood at the altar in his custom suit, looking nervous and happy and completely unaware of what was coming. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Marielle said her vows. Adrian said his. They exchanged rings. They kissed while cameras flashed and people clapped. And then it was done. She was Mrs. Lockhart, bound to this family by law and ceremony and a piece of paper that said she belonged to them now. Except she didn't belong to anyone. She never had. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped light like liquid gold. Champagne flowed like water. The band played music for people who'd never worked a day in their lives, but knew every dance step society demanded. Marielle sat at the head table, her new husband on one side, her new mother-in-law on the other. Victoria held court like a queen, accepting congratulations, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, making sure everyone knew this wedding was her triumph. The guests were exactly who you'd expect. Business moguls. Politicians. Old money and new money and money that had been in families so long it had grown roots. They air-kissed and gossiped and sized each other up, determining who was winning the game of life and who was losing. And they whispered about Marielle. Oh, how they whispered. She heard fragments as she moved through the crowd. Can't believe he actually married her. Victoria must be devastated. Give it 2 years before he comes to his senses. She smiled through every whisper. Posed for every photo. Thanked every guest who offered hollow congratulations. But inside, she was counting down. Waiting for the moment. Dinner was served. 5 courses of food most people couldn't pronounce. Wine pairings. Toasts from Adrian's father about legacy and family honor and maintaining the Lockhart name. Then came the speeches. Adrian's best man told stories about their college days. His sister Elena spoke about what a good brother he was. Victoria herself stood up and talked about how proud she was of her son, how he'd always had a good heart, how she hoped he'd chosen wisely. The subtext was clear. He hadn't chosen wisely, but they'd make the best of it. The guests laughed at all the right moments, applauded at all the right times. Marielle felt the storm building in her chest. And then Adrian's cousin Marcus, drunk on champagne and inherited arrogance, stood up without being invited to speak. He grabbed a microphone from the band stage. I just want to say, he slurred slightly, his words carrying across the silent ballroom, that Adrian's always been the charitable one in the family. Remember when he volunteered at that soup kitchen? Now he's married one of the people from there. Laughter erupted. Not polite chuckles. Real laughter. Mean laughter. The kind that strips away pretense and shows what people really think. Imagine, Marcus continued, emboldened by the reaction, a billionaire marrying a laundress's daughter. It's practically charity work. Someone give this man a humanitarian award. More laughter. Louder now. Victoria didn't stop him. She was smiling into her champagne glass. Adrian's face went red, but he didn't stand. Didn't speak. Just sat there like a statue while his family humiliated his wife. And that's when Marielle felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. The laughter rolled through that ballroom like thunder before lightning. Marielle sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. her face calm as a lake before a storm. But inside, every insult, every whispered cruelty, every moment of being treated like she was less than human crystallized into something sharp and unbreakable. Victoria leaned over, still smiling. Don't take it personally, dear. Marcus has always had a terrible sense of humor. You'll get used to our family's playfulness. Playfulness. As if cruelty became acceptable when wrapped in expensive clothes and spoken with good grammar. Adrian reached for Marielle's hand under the table. She pulled away. Not dramatically. Just a subtle movement that said everything words couldn't. His face fell. He finally understood he'd crossed a line. But understanding came too late, didn't it? It always does. The band tried to restart the music. Conversations resumed at tables around them. The moment was supposed to pass, forgotten like all the other times Marielle had been the joke at their gatherings. Except this time, Marielle stood up. The room didn't notice at first. But then someone saw her walking toward the small stage where the band played. Then another person noticed. Then another. Conversations faded like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the entire ballroom. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a queen's cape. The band leader looked confused, but handed her his microphone when she gestured for it. 200 faces turned toward her. Some curious. Some already smirking, expecting her to stumble through an awkward thank you speech. Some looking embarrassed for her, like watching someone about to humiliate themselves was uncomfortable even for the cruel ones. Victoria's smile finally faded. Something like worry crossed her face. She glanced at her husband, who shrugged helplessly. Adrian half stood from his chair, as if he might try to stop her. But it was too late for that. It had been too late the moment he let Marcus speak. The moment he stayed silent. The moment he chose his family's comfort over his wife's dignity. Marielle stood there in her white dress under the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by wealth she'd never asked for and cruelty she'd never deserved, and she felt the storm inside her finally break free. And when her turn came to speak, she rose like a queen among jackals. Marielle's voice cut through the silence like a knife through butter. First, she began, her words calm and clear as morning light. I want to thank the Lockhart family for welcoming me today. The room relaxed slightly. A few people smiled. They thought they knew what was coming. The grateful poor girl thanking the rich family for their generosity. The predictable script they'd seen 100 times before. Victoria's shoulders dropped. She picked up her champagne glass, already savoring her victory. I know it hasn't been easy for you to accept someone from my background, Marielle continued. Polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Marcus raised his glass in a mock toast. Someone at a back table whispered something that made their neighbors laugh. Adrian looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. But still, he said nothing. Did nothing. Just sat there, frozen. You've made your opinions very clear over these past months, Marielle said, and something in her tone shifted. Something sharp entered her voice. The smiles around the room began to fade. The comments about my clothes. My education. My mother's profession. I heard every single one. The room went perfectly still. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive carpet. Mrs. Lockhart, Marielle looked directly at Victoria. You once introduced me to your friends as the charity case Adrian insists on keeping around. Do you remember that? Victoria's face went pale. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand. And Marcus, Marielle turned to Adrian's cousin, who suddenly looked much more sober. You just called me a soup kitchen recipient. Very creative. Did you come up with that yourself, or did someone help you? The silence was so heavy it felt like the chandeliers might crash down from the weight of it. But here's what's interesting, Marielle said, reaching into a hidden pocket in her wedding dress. She pulled out a small folder. Simple. Elegant. Completely out of place at a wedding. While you were all busy measuring my worth by my mother's job and my thrift store dresses, I was building something. She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, making them wait, making them wonder. You see, I am the daughter of a laundress. That part is absolutely true. My mother washes clothes for a living, and I've never been ashamed of that. Not once. Not ever. Maria, sitting at a table near the front, had tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. Really smiling. "But I'm also something else," Marielle said, and now her voice rang out like a bell. "I'm the founder and CEO of Oriel Naturals. Perhaps you've heard of it." A few gasps. Someone in the back pulled out their phone, already searching. "Last quarter," Marielle continued, "my company was valued at $50 million. And then, with one sentence, she froze the room in silence. The folder landed on the table in front of Victoria with a soft thump that sounded like thunder. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire ballroom suspended in that moment between before and after, between ignorance and knowledge, between their world and the truth. Then Victoria reached for the folder with shaking hands. Her perfectly manicured nails fumbled with the papers inside. Her eyes scanned the first page, financial statements, valuation reports, investor documents. All official. All real. All impossible to deny. Her face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. The confident smirk she'd worn all day melted like wax near flame. This can't be," she stammered, the first time Marielle had ever heard her at a loss for words. "It's very real, Mrs. Lockhart," Marielle said. "Feel free to verify it. In fact, several of my investors are here tonight." She gestured to a table near the back. "I invited them as my personal guests." 3 well-dressed individuals stood up. Recognizable faces. Names that appeared in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. They raised their glasses to Marielle and nodded confirmation. The ballroom erupted. Not in laughter this time. In shock. In whispers. In the sound of 200 people realizing they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Phones came out at tables all over the room. Journalists who'd come to report on a society wedding suddenly had a much better story. Fingers flew across screens as people searched for Oriel Naturals, finding articles about its meteoric growth, its recent expansion into international markets, its projected valuation hitting $100 million within 2 years. Oriel Naturals, someone said loudly enough to be heard. "Holy hell, that's the company everyone's been talking about. The eco-beauty line that's been crushing the competition. She owns that," another voice asked in disbelief. "Founded it," someone else corrected. "Built it from nothing." Marcus had gone completely silent. His face red. His earlier confidence evaporated like morning fog. Elena, Adrian's sister, started laughing. Not cruel laughter. Genuine, surprised laughter. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Mother's been insulting a woman who could buy this entire estate." Victoria shot her daughter a look that could kill. But Elena just shrugged, still grinning. Marielle let the chaos build. Let them process. Let them understand exactly how wrong they'd been. Then she raised her hand, and somehow, impossibly, the room quieted again. "So you see," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of that stunned ballroom, "I may come from modest beginnings. My mother may wash other people's clothes for a living. I may shop at thrift stores and clip coupons and know what it's like to go to bed hungry." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across every face. Every person who'd whispered about her. Every person who'd looked down on her. Every person who'd judged her worth by her background instead of her character. "But I stand here today," she continued, "not as your charity case. Not as someone who got lucky. Not as someone who married up and should be grateful for the scraps from your table." Her voice rose, strong and clear and absolutely unshakable. "I stand here as a woman who built her own empire while you were all busy underestimating her." The applause started small. Her mother. Her few real friends scattered through the crowd. Then it grew. People who respected success more than old money. People who loved seeing the arrogant brought low. People who'd been in Marielle's shoes themselves and knew exactly how this felt. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Standing. Cheering. Victoria sat frozen, the folder still in her trembling hands, watching her perfect wedding dissolve into someone else's triumph. And Adrian? Adrian just stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. In that single moment, the balance of power shifted forever. Adrian's hand reached for Marielle's as she stepped down from the stage. She saw it coming. saw his fingers stretching toward hers like he could somehow fix months of silence with a single touch. Like everything would be okay if he could just hold her hand and whisper an apology nobody else could hear. She moved past him. Not dramatically. Not with anger. Just a simple sidestep that put empty air where his hand had been reaching. His face crumbled. That's the only word for it. Crumbled like a sand castle hit by a wave. Marielle, he said, his voice low and desperate. Can we talk? Please. Not now, she said softly. You have guests to attend to. She walked to her mother's table instead. Maria stood up and wrapped her daughter in the kind of hug that erases everything else. The kind that says I'm proud of you without needing words. You didn't tell me, Maria whispered into her daughter's hair. I needed to know who really cared about me, Marielle whispered back. Not about what I could give them. Around them, the ballroom buzzed with energy. Guests who'd ignored Marielle all night suddenly wanted to talk to her. To congratulate her. To ask about investment opportunities and business partnerships, and wasn't it funny how they'd always known she was special? She smiled politely at them all. Accepted their suddenly warm words with grace. But inside, she felt nothing but cold clarity. These people didn't care about her. They cared about her money. Her success. Her ability to benefit them. Just like the Lockharts had rejected her for lacking those same things. What would you do if someone only valued you after discovering your wealth? Comment below. The reception continued, but everything had changed. The confident superiority the Lockharts had worn like expensive perfume had evaporated. Victoria disappeared into a side room. Marcus left early, too embarrassed to stay. Adrian's father tried to save face by making a toast about how the Lockhart family had always supported entrepreneurship, which made several people laugh openly. Adrian kept trying to approach Marielle. Each time, she found a reason to move away. To talk to another guest. To step outside for air. To check on her mother. Finally, as the night wound down and guests started leaving, he cornered her in the hallway outside the ballroom. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Not angry. Just hurt and confused. I did tell you, she replied calmly. I said I had an online business. You didn't say it was worth $50 million. Would it have mattered? Of course it would have, he stopped, realizing what he'd just said. Exactly, Marielle said softly. It would have mattered. Everything would have been different. And I needed to know if you loved me or if you loved the idea of saving me. That's not fair. Fair. Her voice stayed calm, but something sharp entered it. Was it fair when your cousin called me a charity case and you said nothing? Was it fair when your mother introduced me as your mistake and you laughed along? Was it fair when they tore me down again and again and again and you just sat there? Adrian's mouth opened, but no words came out. I would have walked through fire for you, Marielle said. But you wouldn't even speak up for me at dinner. That's not love, Adrian. That's convenience. That's comfort. That's choosing the easy path because standing up to your family was harder than letting them hurt me. Tears welled up in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. That's the problem, she interrupted gently. You didn't realize. And I spent months waiting for you to notice. Waiting for you to defend me. Waiting for you to choose me over their approval. She touched his cheek softly, one last tender gesture. But you never did. And when he reached for her hand, she let it slip away. Let me tell you something about justice, my dear friends. Something I've learned in all my years watching life unfold. Justice doesn't always come with gavels and judges and people in black robes declaring who's right and who's wrong. Sometimes the most powerful justice is the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to shout or fight or force anything. The kind that simply reveals truth and lets that truth do all the work. That's what happened in that ballroom. Marielle didn't scream at the Lockharts. Didn't curse them. Didn't threaten them or try to hurt them back for all the ways they'd hurt her. She just told the truth at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and let their own pride destroy them. See, the Lockharts had built their world on the idea that money made them superior. That wealth equaled worth. That anyone without their resources must be less than them in every way that mattered. So when Marielle proved she had more resources than they'd imagined, more success than they'd achieved themselves, more power than they'd ever given her credit for, their entire worldview collapsed. They couldn't call her lucky. She'd built her company from nothing. They couldn't call her unworthy. She'd proven her worth in the language they understood best, dollars and success. They couldn't call her a charity case. She could have bought and sold them several times over. Victoria Lockhart spent the next 3 days locked in her room. The humiliation of realizing she'd mocked a woman who could have been her financial equal or superior was too much for her carefully constructed pride to handle. Marcus issued a public apology that nobody believed was sincere. But at least it was something. At least he felt the sting of consequence. The society pages had a field day. Secret CEO reveals fortune at own wedding, one headline read. Billionaire family didn't know bride was richer than they were, claimed another. But here's what made it real justice, not just revenge. Marielle didn't gloat. Didn't parade her victory. Didn't use her moment in the spotlight to tear anyone down. She went back to running her company. Back to her quiet life. Back to visiting her mother on Sundays and eating at the same simple restaurants she'd always loved. The money hadn't changed who she was. It had just revealed who everyone else was. And that's the difference between someone who earns their success and someone who inherits it. Someone who builds an empire learns that money is a tool, not an identity. Someone handed an empire often thinks the money makes them better than everyone else. The Lockharts measured worth by wealth, and that measurement destroyed them when Marielle proved they'd miscalculated. Adrian tried to reconcile with her. Sent flowers. Wrote letters. Called every day for a month. He promised to change. Promised to stand up to his family. Promised he'd never let anyone disrespect her again. But some promises come too late, don't they? Some damage can't be undone with apologies and flowers and tears. Because love without respect is just pretty words. And respect that only appears after you've proven your worth in dollars isn't respect at all. It's just another transaction. 3 months after the wedding, Marielle filed for annulment. Quietly. With dignity. No press conferences. No dramatic announcements. Just clean papers that ended a marriage that should never have happened. Adrian signed them without fighting. Maybe he understood by then. Maybe he finally realized that you can't love someone while staying silent as the world tears them apart. Or maybe he just knew it was over. But this justice came at a cost, one she alone could bear. The real cost of Marielle's justice wasn't money or time, or even the marriage she walked away from. It was the loss of a dream. See, she'd really loved Adrian. Not the billionaire part of him. Not the Lockhart name or the estate or the connections to powerful people. She'd loved the man who helped her fix coding errors in a bookstore cafe. The man who made her laugh. The man who, in quiet moments, made her believe in something she'd stopped believing in years ago. Hope. Hope that someone could love her for who she was, not what she had or didn't have. Hope that she could build a life with someone who saw past the surface to the real person underneath. Hope that love could exist without price tags and calculations and measuring worth in bank accounts. But hope is a fragile thing. And Adrian's silence had shattered it more thoroughly than any cruel word from his family ever could. 6 months after the annulment, Marielle sat in her office, a real office now, in a building her company owned, and looked out the window at the city below. She'd kept building. Kept growing L'Oreal Naturals. The company was on track to hit $100 million in valuation within the year. She'd won. By every measure that mattered to people like the Lockharts, she'd won completely. But late at night, in her quiet apartment, she sometimes wondered about the cost. About whether proving her worth to people who'd never deserved to judge it was really a victory. About whether she should have walked away from Adrian the first time his mother insulted her, instead of waiting, testing, storing up ammunition for a revelation that felt hollow now that it was over. Was it worth it? Her mother asked one Sunday over coffee. Marielle thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, she said finally. Not because I humiliated them, but because I learned something I needed to learn. What's that? That I don't need anyone's approval. Not theirs. Not even Adrian's. She smiled softly. I spent so long trying to prove I was good enough for their world. But their world was never good enough for me. Maria reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Marielle replied. The story could end there. But life doesn't stop for neat endings, does it? Oriel Naturals continued to grow. Marielle hired people from backgrounds like hers. Single mothers. First-generation college students. People who'd been underestimated and overlooked and told they'd never amount to anything. She proved that success isn't about where you start. It's about the direction you're heading and whether you're willing to work for it when nobody believes in you. Adrian moved to California a year later. Started working for a tech company, far from his family's shadow. Marielle heard through mutual friends that he'd changed. Grown up. Learned to stand up for himself and others. Good for him. She genuinely meant that. But he'd learned those lessons too late for them. Victoria never apologized. Some people are too proud to admit they were wrong, even when the evidence is overwhelming. But she stopped hosting her elaborate social events. Word was she couldn't face the whispers, the knowing looks, the memory of her own cruelty coming back to haunt her. Marcus disappeared from public life entirely. Last Marielle heard, he was in rehab. Drinking had caught up with him, the way it catches up with people who use alcohol to drown out the parts of themselves they don't want to face. And Marielle? She kept walking through life with her head high. Not because she defeated the Lockharts, but because she defeated the part of herself that thought she needed their approval. That's the real lesson here, dear friends. The real victory. Never measure a person's worth by where they come from. A seed buried in dirt may one day grow taller than the mansion beside it. Never mock those who walk quietly. Their silence isn't weakness. It's power waiting for its moment. And most of all, remember this. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it comes in a single revelation that turns mockery into shame, pride into humiliation, and cruelty into consequence. Marielle's story teaches us that dignity is wealth that can't be stolen. That silence can be strength gathering itself. That revenge, when served with grace and truth, isn't revenge at all. It's simply justice. Quiet, powerful, and absolutely unforgettable. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by others' judgments, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time you were underestimated and proved everyone wrong. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, somewhere out there right now, another Marielle is building her empire in silence. Another person is being judged unfairly. Another quiet strength is gathering itself for its moment. Maybe that person is you. Until next time, walk with dignity. Build in silence. And never let anyone convince you that where you start determines where you'll end up. The world is full of stories waiting to be told. Stories of quiet triumph and powerful truth. Stories that remind us we're all more than what others see on the surface. Stay tuned, because the next story might be even more powerful than this one. And you won't want to miss it.